She stood dead center in the helicopter's landing zone, arms crossed, waving a plastic badge like it meant something. A child was dying, barely breathing, and this woman, dressed like a suburban warlord, screamed that we were violating HOA airspace. "Land that helicopter and you'll all be arrested," she shrieked, trying to hold her ground against a Blackhawk, descending to save an 8-year-old boy with internal bleeding. The rotors roared. Dust flew. Parents begged her to move. But Karen Blackwood didn't flinch. She thought her fake title, Sheriff of HOA Enforcement, was enough to override a life or death emergency. She'd crossed the line before, but today, she'd shattered it. As the helicopter circled for a second time, unable to land, I pulled out my phone and hit Facebook Live. The world needed to see what this woman had become. Her delusions weren't just annoying anymore, they were lethal. Within 7 minutes, SWAT had breached the subdivision, and as those red and blue lights flooded the field, I knew her reign of suburban terror was ending for good. It was 3 months before that helicopter incident when I first saw her marching across my lawn like she owned the place. I was in the middle of watering tomato vines with my kids, trying to keep Sarah's garden alive, just like I promised her before cancer took her away. It was early 8 a.m., and already the Texas heat was drawing sweat across my brow. Ethan stood next to me, hose in hand. Lily danced barefoot in the wet grass, chasing dragonflies, laughing like she hadn't seen the loss I carried. Then came the voice. Sharp, smug, measured like a scalpel. "Excuse me, sir. You must be Mr. Jack Anderson." I turned. There she stood, mid-50s, gray-streaked bob. Oversized sunglasses, a clipboard, hugged tight to her chest like body armor. A tape measure dangled from her belt, like some sort of suburban badge of office. "I'm Karen Blackwell, HOA compliance officer for the Rosewood Estates community." She tilted her head, squinting at our trees like they'd personally offended her. "Those apple trees are a clear violation of Article 9.4 of our landscaping policy. Trees may not exceed 4 feet in height, within 12 feet of a boundary line." I stared, stunned. "Lady, this house was built in '85. The apple trees were here before your HOA ever existed." "They're non-compliant," she snapped. "You've got 48 hours before we issue a $500 fine." Ethan stepped closer to me, dirt still on his hands, sensing my body tense. Lily, oblivious, kept running in circles through the sprinkler. Karen clicked her pen dramatically and made a note on her clipboard like she was writing a death sentence. "I'll also be conducting a full property inspection over the next few weeks," she added. "We've received concerns about non-conforming garden beds, unregistered agricultural activity, and excessive foot traffic on your driveway." Foot traffic. Before I could reply, she turned on her sensible heels and walked away, leaving behind a letter folded in HOA stationery, tucked under a stone on my porch. That evening, after putting the kids to bed, I sat at my kitchen table reading the document. It wasn't just a warning. It was a legal threat, references to county zoning codes, urban agricultural violations, even threats of lien placement. My fingers trembled. I looked outside at Sarah's apple trees silhouetted in the dusk. They were never just trees. They were hers. She'd planted them during remission, smiling as she taught Ethan how to prune, showing Lily how to press blossoms in a book. Every branch held memory. And now some clipboard-carrying vigilante wanted to rip it all down. The next morning, I poured black coffee and opened my laptop. Karen Blackwell, the HOA. The name didn't sit right. I searched her online. What I found wasn't a profile, it was a dossier. Hundreds of posts filled with grainy, zoomed-in photos of neighbors' homes' bikes left out after dusk lawn edges too fuzzy. Welcome mats that didn't meet visual uniformity. And then I found a post dated 2 weeks ago. It was a photo of Lily in her room through her bedroom window, brushing her hair. The caption: "Some folks need to be reminded that privacy starts with proper curtains. Community standards matter." My stomach dropped. I slammed the laptop shut. She'd been watching us. I called Marcus. Marcus Cooper answered on the second ring. "Jack, man, I was wondering how long it would take you to call. You've dealt with her too." He chuckled dryly. "She fined my grandmother for growing lavender. Said the scent was unnecessarily provocative." "What's up?" "She's been photographing my daughter. Through her window." Silence. "I need your help, Marcus." An hour later, we met at the Java Hut downtown. Karen rarely left Rosewood Estates, and even if she did, she wouldn't be watching from her surveillance fortress this far out. Marcus looked like he hadn't slept in days. Oil-stained hoodie eyes, ringed with exhaustion, but sharper than ever. He flipped open his laptop and loaded aerial footage from his drone. I was doing a property survey for insurance when I noticed these. He zoomed in tiny black dots tucked into trees, lampposts, even a mailbox flag. They're surveillance cameras, he said flatly. High grade, wireless transmission, battery life of months. I've counted at least 12 so far. I leaned in. Who are they aimed at? He pulled up a map with labeled red circles. Our house, his, 5 others. All families with kids or elderly residents. People who've pushed back on HOA rules. The pattern was chilling. Karen wasn't just nosy. She was orchestrating a full-blown intelligence operation. Recording someone on their property in Texas without consent. Marcus paused. That's a felony. 10 grand per device. She could be looking at 6 figures in fines, maybe prison. I exhaled hard, then looked up at him. So, why haven't you reported it? His face darkened. 3 years ago, I got pulled over for looking suspicious, translation black guy, Tesla night drive. They tore apart my car. Found nothing. Still spent 6 hours in lockup. I don't exactly trust the system anymore. But this is different, Marcus, I said. She's watching your grandmother. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded. That night, I checked the old oak outside Lily's window. There it was, a tiny matchbox-sized camera mounted in the bark. Painted brown, weatherproofed, screwed in deep. My hands trembled as I unscrewed it. All I could think about was Sarah telling the kids that home would always be their safe place. Karen Blackwell had violated that. And she had no idea what was coming. Tomorrow, the war would begin. The next morning, I stood on my porch holding that camera in my hand like it was a live grenade. The weathered screws told a quiet truth. Karen hadn't just started spying recently. She'd been watching since we moved in. I dialed Marcus. Jack, listen, he said before I could speak. I'm not sure I'm your guy for this anymore. His voice was flat weary. I get it, I replied. You've been burned. But this isn't just about property violations or HOA drama anymore. She's watching kids. Watching your grandmother. There's a line, Marcus. She crossed it. I drove straight to his garage workshop, where I found him hunched over a soldering station, half buried in drone parts and security schematics. Rose was outside tending her lavender, the same one Karen had once labeled a weaponized fragrance. I showed him the camera. He took it carefully, turning it in his hands, like an archaeologist uncovering an ancient weapon. This is military grade. Battery lasts 6 months. Night vision, motion triggered. And see this? He pointed to the serial number. Black Market Tech. This wasn't bought at Best Buy. He looked at me jaw tight. All right, Jack, I'm in. We spent the next 2 hours flying Marcus's drone over the neighborhood, documenting every camera, every sensor, every fake HOA security sign hidden like landmines around people's yards. But the real gut punch came later that evening. I was tucking Lily into bed when I got a neighborhood-wide email from the HOA. Subject line, final warning. Security concerns. The message was a full-on smear campaign. Aerial shots of my property. Highlighted violations like Lily's bicycle near the porch. Ethan's basketball hoop, even a compost pile Sarah had started years ago. But it wasn't the photos that made my blood run cold, it was the final paragraph. Residents should be aware that Mr. Jack Anderson has been observed conducting suspicious nighttime activity. Report all unusual behavior to HOA security immediately. She wasn't just spying now. She was painting me as a threat. I called Marcus. She's trying to turn the whole neighborhood against me, I said. He was silent for a moment. Then I heard him typing. If we're going to end this, we need evidence no one can ignore. Something that makes even the people who like her realize what she really is. And how do we get that? We let her think she's winning. It was risky, but we didn't have many cards left. 2 days later, Marcus dropped a manila envelope on my kitchen table. Inside were printouts, photos, diagrams, and a detailed plan for how we'd bait Karen into revealing the depth of her illegal surveillance. It started simple. We placed dummy violations around my property garbage bins, out an hour late. Lily's toys near the curb, a garden hose slightly unraveled. Marcus set up motion-activated decoy cameras aimed not at neighbors, but at the sky. His drone buzzed around our block twice a day, collecting passive signals from Karen's hidden cameras, mapping their radio frequencies and transmission points. Then came the night we caught her red-handed. Marcus's drone, equipped with night vision, hovered silently above the HOA clubhouse. At 2:11 a.m., Karen stepped out the back door, carrying what looked like a hard drive. She moved with purpose, paranoid glances over her shoulder, before disappearing into the woods behind the clubhouse, where, according to our prior drone footage, she had a buried equipment vault. The next morning, we confronted Deputy Helen Ramirez, one of the few local law enforcement officers Marcus still trusted. She wasn't just a cop. She was a mom, a neighbor, someone whose own daughter had once been flagged for a non-regulation lemonade stand. When she saw the drone footage, the time-stamped screenshots, the surveillance camera we'd recovered, her lips thinned. "Jack," she said, "this isn't HOA misconduct. This is criminal surveillance and defamation. Possibly even child endangerment, depending on the footage she's collecting." Still, Ramirez warned us Karen had friends in high places, political donations, ties to the sheriff's campaign. Taking her down wouldn't be clean. "She's not just delusional," Marcus added. "She's organized, and she's escalating." He wasn't wrong. That evening, while Lily and Ethan were setting the dinner table, a man in a fake police uniform showed up on our porch. He wore a knockoff tactical vest and flashed a badge that said Chief Compliance Officer, HOA Security Division. He said his name was Trevor Haynes and claimed he was conducting a security audit. I shut the door in his face. Then I called Ramirez. "He's not a real cop," she confirmed after running his plate. "Private security contractor with a history of impersonation. I'm escalating this to county prosecutors." But the damage was already in motion. Karen's next email was more aggressive than ever. She'd fabricated community complaints, accused me of trespassing, of damaging HOA property, even of harassing neighbors. I'd gone from concerned resident to public enemy number one, and people were starting to believe it. Mason's mom stopped waving at us from her driveway. The Thompsons refused to let their kids come over to play. Even Marcus got cold stares from folks he'd helped fix sprinklers for last summer. Karen's propaganda was working. That's when Marcus had the idea that would change everything. "We live stream it," he said. "The next time she tries to interfere with something big, something no one can justify, we make it public. No editing, no filters, just the raw truth." I didn't realize how soon that opportunity would come, and that it would involve a child fighting for his life. Saturday morning, dawn, bright, warm, and deceptively peaceful. I'd planned the community event for weeks. Open farm day, an invitation for neighbors to come see what Sarah and I had built. For once, I wanted to show them we weren't the enemy. We were part of this place. 15 families had RSVP'd. Kids brought notebooks, parents asked about composting. We showed them how to identify herbs, how to build raised beds, how Sarah's garden had become a living classroom. Even Deputy Rodriguez showed up with his son Mason, a curious, hyperactive third grader, who peppered me with non-stop questions about worms, soil acidity, and drip irrigation. Rodriguez looked relaxed for the first time in months, watching Mason climb the trellis structure that once served as Sarah's chicken coop. I should have said no. I should have told him to keep both feet on the ground. Mason climbed 6 feet up, camera in hand, aiming to take a panoramic photo of the garden for a school project. That's when the main support beam, brittle from years of sun and cold, cracked with a sound like a gunshot. The wooden frame collapsed. Mason went down with it. The silence that followed felt infinite until it was shattered by Rodriguez screaming his son's name. Parents rushed in. I reached Mason first. His leg was twisted at a sickening angle. He was barely breathing. Rodriguez dropped to his knees and checked for a pulse. "He's going into shock. Possible internal bleeding. We need air evac." I called 911. The dispatcher confirmed Mason would need a helicopter to reach the trauma center in time. "Flight for life en route," she said. "ETA 7 minutes. Prepare a clear zone." We moved cars, cleared the driveway, tied down tarps and garden tools to prevent rotor wash debris. Everyone moved with frantic precision because when a kid's life is on the line, you don't argue, you act. Then she appeared, Karen Blackwell, marching across the field behind my barn like a demon summoned by chaos. Clipboard in one hand, plastic badge in the other. She walked straight into the designated landing zone just as the helicopter appeared over the treetops. She raised the badge above her head like it held divine authority. "This airspace is restricted under HOA regulation. 12C unauthorized medical flights are not permitted without HOA clearance." The pilot hovered, unable to land. Rodriguez looked like he was going to explode. "Move, Karen," he shouted, voice cracking under the weight of panic. She didn't budge. "This is a violation of community air traffic protocol," she screamed back. That's when I pulled out my phone and went live. So did half the other parents. Dozens of phones captured Karen's meltdown as she blocked the rescue. People were shouting. Some were crying. Rodriguez was performing rescue breathing on his own son, while Karen screamed about compliance zones and emergency protocol violations. The pilot radio dispatched civilian obstructing medical landing zone. Individual impersonating law enforcement. Minutes later, sirens echoed in the distance. Then came the words that changed everything. Federal interference protocol activated. SWAT deployment authorized. Karen's face paled. She turned to the crowd parents holding children phones pointed squarely at her, and for the first time she seemed uncertain, like a child caught playing dictator in front of the adults. But it was too late. She'd crossed the line, and the world was watching. The sirens grew louder until 4 blacked-out SUVs skidded across my property, followed by 2 helicopters that descended into the adjacent field. SWAT officers in full tactical gear spilled out, efficient and silent like a well-oiled machine. A tall woman with a flak jacket labeled Torres approached Karen, who was still frozen in place, her fake badge trembling in her hand. "Ma'am," Commander Torres said firmly, "you are interfering with an active federal medical operation. Step aside." Karen straightened, clutching her clipboard like a shield. "I am the duly elected sheriff of the Rosewood HOA Enforcement Division. These individuals are in violation of—" Before she could finish, Torres gestured and 2 officers flanked her. One held up her badge. "This is a novelty item," he said loudly. "Purchased online. You have no legal authority." The crowd murmured, phones recording everything. Someone behind me whispered, "Oh my God, she really thought she was in charge." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "I demand to speak to the manager of the FBI." Torres didn't blink. "You'll be speaking to a federal judge instead." The pilot got the green light, and the helicopter finally landed. Paramedics rushed out, loaded Mason onto a stretcher, and within minutes, the bird was airborne again, on its way to the trauma center. Rodriguez climbed aboard, holding his son's hand the whole way. And Karen, she was escorted off the landing zone, still ranting about bylaws and neighborhood safety, as the agents read her rights. But it wasn't over. Torres turned to the crowd and raised her voice. "Folks, what you witnessed today is the visible part of something far larger. We have reason to believe this HOA has been involved in organized criminal activity, including illegal surveillance, impersonation of law enforcement, and obstruction of emergency services." Gasps rippled through the gathering. Torres continued, "We're proceeding now to the HOA clubhouse. Anyone who's felt victimized by this organization, you may want to come see what we uncover." And they did. Nearly half the neighborhood followed the SWAT convoy in their own cars, as if attending the world's most surreal community meeting. What we found in that basement would haunt us for years. Karen hadn't just been spying, she'd built an entire command center. Screens, monitors, and surveillance feeds from inside people's homes, private bedrooms, children's play areas, all labeled, cataloged, color-coded by compliance threat level. She had AI-powered facial recognition software, license plate readers, predictive algorithms, and in a hidden safe room, over 30 firearms, tactical gear, flashbang grenades labeled HOA enforcement only. Karen wasn't just power-hungry. She was preparing for war, but she lost it before it ever began. That night, standing outside the clubhouse, as Karen and her co-conspirator Trevor were driven away in separate armored vans, I felt the entire neighborhood shift. People who hadn't spoken in years were hugging. Children who'd been afraid to play outside were laughing again. Something had broken and something stronger was rising in its place. 6 months had passed since Karen's fake badge had been ripped from her hand, and her fantasy empire dissolved in front of a cheering crowd. What once was fear, isolation, and silence had transformed into something powerful, something I never thought I'd witness again. Hope. Mason made a full recovery. His leg healed, his lungs strengthened, and that same third grader who once lay motionless beneath a pile of cracked lumber now stood proudly in front of the community golden scissors, in hand ready to cut the ribbon on something truly special. Sarah's garden had been reborn not just as our private sanctuary, but as a full-scale community garden. It had herb rows, vegetable beds, trellises for beans and tomatoes, composting stations, and shaded benches made from reclaimed wood. But more than that, it was a symbol of defiance against the kind of fear Karen tried to instill. Parents volunteered their weekends. Retired veterans taught kids how to grow squash. Teens who'd once feared getting fined for loitering now ran free gardening workshops. Every inch of that soil had been fought for, and every leaf that grew from it felt like proof we'd won something bigger than a legal battle. We'd reclaimed our dignity. Deputy Rodriguez was the first one to speak that morning, standing beside Mason with a smile that barely held back tears. "Community doesn't come from rules," he said. "It comes from responsibility and respect. And people like Jack Anderson who never gave up." I didn't plan on speaking, but the crowd nudged me forward. I cleared my throat. Sarah once told me the garden was more than food. It was legacy. She believed in putting roots down, in teaching our kids that what we nurture, what we tend with care, will grow into something beautiful. I looked at the families gathered, the volunteers, the faces that once avoided mine, but now smiled with familiarity. She believed home was sacred, I said. And no rule book, no badge, no surveillance system has the right to take that away. Applause rippled through the garden, not thunderous but warm. Honest. Later that afternoon, as the kids ran through the rows with watering cans and parents exchanged recipes beside the compost bins, I sat on a bench beneath the oak tree. The same tree where Karen had once hidden a camera. Now a wind chime made from old gardening tools hung there, catching the breeze. That's when Patricia Winters sat down beside me. Yes, the same Judge Winters who'd stood up to Karen during that fateful HOA meeting. Since the raid, she and I had formed something unexpected, a friendship that had evolved into something more. She nudged my shoulder. You ever imagine all this would happen? A garden turning into a movement. I shook my head. I just wanted my kids to feel safe. Now, I don't even know what we are. A farm, a nonprofit, a revolution. She smiled, maybe all three. She handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter from the Nationwide HOA Alliance. They represented over 24 neighborhoods, dealing with similar nightmares. Rogue HOA leaders, illegal surveillance, corruption. Word of what we'd done had spread farther than I realized. Mr. Anderson, the letter began. Your story has inspired countless families. We'd like to invite you to speak at our national summit and help guide communities through their own path to freedom. I stared at the words. It didn't feel real. But as I looked up at Ethan and Lily helping another child plant carrots, I realized something. We didn't just survive. We changed the rules. The invitation felt both surreal and inevitable. Everything we'd gone through, the threats, the surveillance, the smear campaigns had built to this. The next week, I flew to Denver to speak at the National HOA Reform Summit. I'd never been a public speaker. But when I stepped onto that stage, faced with hundreds of homeowners who had been bullied into silence by bureaucrats and clipboard tyrants, I didn't feel nervous. I felt ready. I'm not an activist, I began. I'm not a lawyer. I'm a dad. I'm a gardener. I'm a guy who watched his kids sleep through the lens of a hidden camera planted by someone who called herself a protector of property values. The room went quiet. But what I learned is this: rules without humanity aren't safety. They're control. And when good people accept those rules without question, neighborhoods turn into prisons. I shared what we'd done, how we'd mapped the surveillance, how Marcus had used his drone to expose the lies, how we'd used Facebook Live not to entertain but to survive. I ended with the story of Sarah, how her apple trees became the first target, how her garden became the battlefield, and how her memory became the spark that ignited a movement. When I finished, the applause didn't come all at once. It built slow and steady until the entire auditorium was on their feet. Afterward, I was approached by lawyers, former HOA board members, and families who whispered their own stories of intimidation, harassment, fear. Many had suffered in silence for years. Some had moved just to escape. Others were still trapped. But they weren't alone anymore. Back in Rosewood, everything had changed. The HOA had been formally dissolved by a court order. In its place, we founded the Rosewood Community Cooperative, a volunteer group that managed shared spaces, planned events, and rejected any form of surveillance or forced conformity. Our first official act, a sign posted at the entrance of the neighborhood. Welcome to Rosewood, HOA free since 2024. It became a selfie spot. Tourists even came by to see the neighborhood that beat the badge. But for me, the best moment came one Sunday afternoon when Lily tugged my sleeve and said, "Dad, are we finally safe now?" I knelt down, hugged her, and whispered, "Yes, sweetheart, we are." I used to think survival was the goal. When Sarah died, I shrank into a life of keeping things together. Get the kids to school, water the tomatoes, keep the lights on, avoid trouble. That was it. My days were measured in tasks, not purpose. But after everything, something shifted. The first time I really noticed it was the morning I taught a group of teenagers how to compost. They weren't there for extra credit. They wanted to learn. They wanted to get their hands dirty. One of them, a kid named Toby, had once been fined by the HOA for skateboarding on the sidewalk. He told me, "Mr. Anderson, this is the first time anyone's listened to me without writing me up." That hit me harder than it should have, because it made me realize just how much fear had soaked into the bones of our neighborhood. People didn't talk. Kids didn't play. Neighbors peeked through curtains. And for years, we all called it safety. I didn't become some community leader overnight. But little by little, people started showing up. They asked for advice. They offered to help. And when they spoke, they looked me in the eye. That was new. Even Ethan, who had stopped asking questions after Sarah passed, started sitting with me again in the evenings, asking things like, How does the city budget work, or why do we even need HOAs? We talked about civic responsibility, about the difference between law and power, about how some people wear uniforms to protect and others to intimidate. He started keeping a notebook, writing down things he noticed ideas for how our town could improve. One night he showed me a drawing a new community playground designed by Kids for Kids. "I want to build this, Dad," he said. And I believed him. Lily changed too. She stopped whispering when she played near her bedroom window. She left her bike out without fear. She painted a mural on the garden shed of butterflies and stars and wrote above it, "This is what home feels like now." That mural became a local landmark. Even strangers came by to take photos with it. I had no idea a paintbrush in the hands of a 9-year-old could undo months of paranoia. But that's the thing, once the cameras came down, people looked up again. We hosted block parties, potlucks, movie nights projected onto the garage door. The sound of children playing became the soundtrack of Rosewood again. Still, it wasn't easy. Trust takes time. Healing isn't instant. But something had changed in me. I wasn't just fighting anymore. I was planting, building, leading. The last person I expected to reach out was Betty Kowalski, Karen's mother. She called one evening, her voice trembling but resolute. "Jack, I just wanted to say thank you for not letting this destroy me too." We talked for almost an hour. She'd started attending our community meetings, helping with the garden fundraisers, even baking cookies for the neighborhood kids. At first, people avoided her, but she never asked for sympathy. She showed up. She worked. And over time, Rosewood forgave her. I enabled her, she admitted. Not because I believed in her, but because I didn't want to believe I'd raised someone capable of such cruelty. I told her what I truly believed: you didn't create what she became. But by helping stop her, you helped create this. I gestured out the window at the garden, at the people laughing over lemonade and repotting basil. The thing is, no one here was perfect. We had our flaws, our fears, our moments of silence when we should have spoken. But we also had something stronger: resilience. And for the first time in a long time, I understood the full meaning of Sarah's final words to me: "Protect the roots, Jack." Even in the storm. At the time, I thought she meant the apple trees. Now I know she meant the community. She meant Ethan. She meant Lily. She meant all of us. And so I kept showing up. I testified before a state panel on HOA abuse, sharing everything we uncovered, from fake police gear to falsified documents and surveillance tech. I co-wrote a guide with Marcus on how neighborhoods could identify signs of overreach before it turned into oppression. I helped draft legislation with Judge Winters that would redefine HOA oversight statewide. And through it all, I kept tending that garden. The same one Sarah started with nothing but hope and a shovel. Because growth isn't flashy. It doesn't scream. It doesn't wear a badge. It happens quietly, relentlessly, like roots under the surface slowly breaking apart everything built on fear. On a perfect spring morning, sky clear, sun gentle, I stood beside Lily and Ethan at the new entrance gate to Sarah's garden. Mason was there too, alongside Deputy Rodriguez, Patricia Winters, Marcus, and dozens of families who once walked on eggshells in their own yards. Above us hung a hand-painted wooden sign that read, "Planted in memory, grown in freedom." The ribbon cutting wasn't ceremonial, it was sacred. Every inch of this place had been earned through grief, through resistance, through relentless persistence in the face of fear. And now, it stood open to everyone. No walls, no cameras, no hidden bylaws or fake citations, just sunlight, soil, and laughter. Patricia spoke first. "What we've done here isn't just about a neighborhood, it's a message. Across the country, people are realizing that rules should serve people, not rule them." Then Marcus stepped forward. "Technology can be a weapon or a shield. It all depends on who holds it. We chose to use it to protect." Finally, Rodriguez. "This garden saved my son's life in more ways than one. And it showed me that sometimes true authority comes from compassion, not control." I was the last to speak. I kept it simple. I made a promise to Sarah to protect this garden, but I didn't realize that would mean protecting our entire way of life. I looked at the crowd. At some point, we all believed someone like Karen couldn't be stopped, that maybe silence was safer. But the truth is, she wasn't powerful. She was just loud. And fear isn't leadership. The applause came not from excitement, but from relief. The kind that lingers after the storm breaks, and you realize the house is still standing. That afternoon, families wandered freely among the rows of greens and herbs. Kids planted seeds, decorated name tags, chased butterflies. Marcus gave drone lessons to teenagers using salvaged tech from Karen's surveillance system. Patricia hosted a constitution workshop under the gazebo. teaching young girls that law and justice aren't always the same thing. And me, I stood quietly soaking it all in. At one point, Ethan handed me a piece of folded paper. It was a sketch of our house, surrounded by apple trees, a garden in full bloom, and a banner overhead that read, "The place where things grow again." "Do you think Mom would have liked it?" he asked. I knelt beside him and said, "She wouldn't just like it, Ethan. She'd fight for it." He smiled, and for a moment I saw Sarah in his eyes. That same mix of stubbornness and hope. That belief that broken things could grow back stronger. Later that night, when the last guest had gone, I sat alone in the garden. The wind rustled through the beans. The chimes on the oak tree sang softly. I thought about what it meant to win. Not in court, not on paper, but in spirit. To look around and say, we reclaimed what was ours. We turned fear into fertilizer, pain into purpose, division into unity. We turned a place of silence into a chorus, a garden into a movement. And the story isn't over, because every seed planted here will carry our legacy forward to other towns, other families, other communities who are ready to take back their power. They'll know it's possible, because we showed them. Sometimes the most dangerous threats don't come from outside. They come wearing smiles, rules, and titles that sound legitimate. Karen Blackwell didn't carry a weapon. She carried a clipboard. But what she tried to steal was just as harmful: privacy, dignity, peace of mind. The real lesson here isn't about HOA, abuse, or surveillance. It's about courage. Standing up when it's inconvenient. Speaking out when you're scared. Protecting what matters, even when you feel alone. Jack Anderson never planned to lead a movement. He just wanted to protect his kids, his wife's garden, and the life they'd built. But his refusal to surrender, to accept injustice as just the way things are, sparked a revolution. And that's the truth about change. It rarely starts with politicians or policies. It starts with one person refusing to let fear win. One parent saying enough. One neighbor reaching out. In a world where authority is often abused under the banner of order, the most powerful resistance is remembering your worth and helping others remember theirs. If you're living under an HOA or community board that feels more like a regime than a resource, know this: you have rights. Document everything. Talk to your neighbors. Don't let isolation feed their power. If someone crosses the line from enforcing rules to controlling lives, don't wait until it escalates. File formal complaints. Reach out to local journalists, advocacy groups, or legal aid. And if you have kids, teach them early. Rules are meant to serve people, not rule them. A vegetable patch might not look like a battlefield, but defending it like Jack did can change a community and maybe the country.